What would you do if the man waiting for you at the altar walked in with another woman, and the entire court watched to see whether you would break? In a cathedral built for power, tradition, and perfect appearances, Elara believed she was about to step into the life she had earned until her wedding was stolen in front of everyone who had always looked down on her. But just when humiliation seemed inevitable, one man rose from the shadows of the ceremony and made a choice that would shock the kingdom, rewrite her fate, and turn a discarded bride into the most dangerous woman in the room. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Now let's begin the story. The cathedral had been built to make people feel small. Light poured down through stained glass in careful holy colors, gold diluted to honey red, softened to rose so that every shadow looked intentional. The marble aisle was so polished, it reflected the chandeliers like a second ceiling. Everything was clean, still expensive, in a way that didn't warm the air. Even the silence felt curated. Elara Whitfield stood at the altar and tried to breathe like she belonged there. Her dress was ivory-tailored, close at the bodice, and stiff with hidden structure, as if the fabric itself had been trained to behave. The sleeves sat perfectly on her arms. The lace at her collarbone lay like a quiet rule. The bouquet in her hands, white roses, lilies a ribbon. The exact shade of pearl had been arranged to look effortless, which meant someone had sweated over it for hours. Elara's fingers tightened around the stems anyway, not because she was unsure of the vows, not because she didn't understand what this meant. She had understood for 3 years. She had understood in the late nights in Halbrook House when she sat at a desk that wasn't hers, writing letters that would be signed by someone else. She had understood every time she took a sentence from chaos and turned it into diplomacy, every time she made a failing negotiation look like a triumph, every time she solved a problem quietly and watched a man in a fine coat accept praise for it. For today was supposed to be the day she stopped standing behind curtains. Today, she told herself, she would step into their world and never have to ask permission again. The officiant began in a voice that was meant to carry softly. "We are gathered here," he said, to witness the union of two houses. Elara exhaled. Slow, controlled. She could do controlled. Controlled had kept her alive in rooms where she wasn't invited to speak. Across the cathedral, the pews were full. The nobility sat in neat lines like they'd been sorted by blood. Fans were held just high enough to conceal expressions. Rings caught the light and threw little flashes like warnings. Every head was turned towards the altar. Every gaze pinned Elara in place, as if they were waiting for her to make a mistake and give them permission to say, "See, we were right." She lifted her chin anyway. "This is it," she told herself. "This is what you worked for. Not the dress, not the cathedral, not his name, the position, the legitimacy, the moment no one can erase." The officiant continued. A bond entered freely before the crown, and he paused. It was a small pause. A breath, a slip. But in a room built for ceremony, a pause was a crack. Elara's eyes moved almost against her will towards the great doors. They were still closed. The groom had not yet arrived. At first she tried to accept it as something ordinary. A delay, a carriage stuck, a shoe strap snapped. Men were always late to things they assumed would wait for them. But the seconds stretched. The silence sharpened around her. In the pews, a few nobles leaned closer together. Someone's fan snapped shut with a soft, decisive sound. The officiant glanced to the side, uncertain, then offered a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We will," he said, clearing his throat. "Wait just a moment longer." Elara did not look back. She did not let her face change. Behind her she felt movement subtle, organized, like a tide shifting. House Halbrook sat in the front rows, crisp as an emblem. Marquis Roland Halbrook, the groom's father, spoke in a low voice to someone beside him. He did not once look at Elara. That detail landed harder than the delay. 3 years, she thought. 3 years of making your house look smarter than it is. And today, you can't even meet my eyes. Her skin prickled under the lace at her neck. It's just a delay, she told herself. It's just... The doors opened. The sound traveled through the cathedral metal on metal old hinges, surrendering the echo of the outside world pushing in. Every head turned. Every whisper died. Elara stayed facing forward for 1 beat too long, as if her body refused to accept what was coming, as if she could delay it by not looking. Then she turned. Lord Adrian Halbrook stepped into the cathedral, and he was not alone. A woman walked beside him, her hand resting on his forearm as if it belonged there. Lady Seraphine Duval wore white too, but not ivory, not restrained. Her gown was bright as snow, jeweled at the neckline with a train that trailed behind her like a declaration. She carried herself with the easy confidence of someone who had never had to earn space. Her smile was soft, almost kind, until it reached Elara, and then it turned into something sharper. Adrian's face was pale, not with guilt, with strain, with the look of a man who had agreed to something he didn't want to understand. The cathedral did not breathe. Elara felt her bouquet go heavy in her hands, as if the flowers had suddenly remembered they were cut. Marquis Roland Halbrook rose from his seat and stepped into the aisle. He moved with calm authority, like a man who believed the world rearranged itself around his decisions. He did not address Elara. He addressed the room. "There has been," he said, voice measured a necessary adjustment. A ripple moved through the nobility. A few heads tilted, hungry for scandal. A few mouths covered by fans turned toward each other with restrained delight. Elara's pulse thudded in her throat. Marquis Halbrook continued, as if announcing a change in the menu. "Before the ceremony proceeds, it must be understood that House Halbrook will enter into union with Lady Seraphine Duval." A stunned silence, then the first whisper. "Elara." Someone breathed too softly to be kind. Elara's mind tried to catch up. The words hit her like cold water, and her thoughts scattered. Adrian took 1 step forward as if he might speak. His gaze flicked toward Elara, then slid away. He could not hold it. He could not hold her. Marquis Halbrook's tone remained calm. "The previous arrangement," he said, "was made under circumstances that no longer apply. We have obligations, alliances, responsibilities to our house and our future." Elara heard herself speak before she realized she was speaking. "An arrangement," she said. Her voice was quiet, but in the cathedral it carried. "That's what you called it." Marquis Halbrook finally turned his eyes to her. They were cool and assessing, like a man appraising something he had decided to discard. "Elara," he said, and the use of her first name felt like a dismissal. "You should step down, as if she had been standing somewhere by accident, as if she were a servant who had wandered into the wrong room." Elara stared at him for a heartbeat, then looked at Adrian. Her throat tightened. "Adrian," she said, voice still controlled, "is that what this is?" Adrian swallowed. His fingers curled slightly against Seraphine's arm, then relaxed. He still didn't let go. "This is," he began, then stopped. His voice came out thin. "This is necessary." Elara's breath went shallow. Necessary, she repeated. For whom? He didn't answer that. He couldn't. He didn't even look at her. Marquis Halbrook stepped closer, as if to end the exchange. You have served House Halbrook adequately, he said, in a tone that might have been compliment if it hadn't been public. But you must understand your position. You are not. His gaze moved over her dress, her posture, her hands, of a suitable line for the responsibilities this union requires. A whisper rose quick and hungry. Common, someone said, not quite under their breath. Elara felt heat bloom behind her eyes. She kept her face smooth. She asked softly, "And everything you promised me was what?" A misunderstanding. Adrian finally spoke, still not meeting her gaze. "Elara, please. Don't. What her voice sharpened on the edge of control. Don't embarrass you." He flinched as if the word had struck him. Marquis Halbrook cut in, cool as stone. "You will be compensated," he said. "Appropriately. Compensated." As if she had been hired. A small laugh came from somewhere among the pews. Someone murmured, "At least she'll get paid." Elara's fingers tightened around the bouquet until the stems bit into her skin. She should have cried. That would have made them comfortable. That would have fit the story they already wanted to tell the discarded girl, the sobbing scandal the natural order restored. Instead, Elara stood very still. Inside, something was breaking. Not her dignity. Something else. Something she had clung to for 3 years, the belief that effort mattered here. That if you worked hard enough, you would be seen. She realized with a clarity that almost stunned her that they had never intended to see her. Marquis Halbrook spoke again, voice firm. "Step aside, Elara. You no longer hold that place." The officiant shifted, helpless. Adrian didn't move. Seraphine's expression stayed serene, almost gentle, as if she were watching a lesson being taught. Elara held their gazes in turn. Marquis, Adrian, Seraphine, the rows of nobles waiting for her to fall. Her mouth lifted into something that wasn't a smile. "If I step down," she said quietly, "you'll call it mercy." No one answered. Elara turned back toward the altar, not to reclaim it, but to do something small that felt like an act of war. She set the bouquet down, slowly, carefully, in the center as if placing an offering on a grave. Then she faced Adrian again. "You don't lack choices," she said. "You lack courage." Adrian's face flushed anger, or shame, she couldn't tell. Elara's gaze slid past him to the pews. "And you," she said to the nobility voice still calm, lack memory. "You forget who keeps your world running." A ripple moved through the room. Some indignation, some discomfort, the kind of discomfort that comes when a servant speaks like an equal. Marquis Halbrook's jaw tightened. Enough. Elara did not raise her voice. That was the point. She took one step down from the altar, then another, as if she were obeying until the room realized she was not leaving in shame. She was leaving in control, but she did not make it to the aisle. A movement at the back of the cathedral shifted the air. At first, it was nothing. A chair scraped softly. A change in posture. A subtle, uninvited presence stepping into the story. Then a man stood. He did not stand like someone seeking attention. He stood like a decision. No one announced him. No one needed to. A few heads turned and stiffened, and suddenly the room was too quiet, as if everyone had remembered something dangerous at the same moment. A whisper moved through the pews, brittle with disbelief. "Valancrest." Elara's gaze lifted. Duke Lucian Valancrest was not dressed in ceremonial finery. No bright sash, No glittering medals. He wore dark cloth cut clean and close with the simple elegance of someone who didn't need ornament. His hair was dark touched faintly with silver at the temples. His face held the calm severity of a man who had learned to keep emotion private and consequence public. He began walking down the aisle. Each step was measured, unhurried. A man unafraid of the silence he caused. He did not look left or right. He did not acknowledge the nobility watching him with unease. His attention stayed fixed on the altar, on Elara standing halfway down, still poised, as if she were holding herself together by will alone. Marquis Halbrook straightened. "Your Grace," he said quickly, too quickly, "this is an internal matter." Lucian stopped in the center of the aisle. He looked at Marquis Halbrook the way one might look at a fly that had landed on a letter. "Internal," he repeated, voice low. Not loud, not theatrical, yet it carried, and the weight of it pressed down on every ear. Marquis Halbrook forced a thin smile, a change in alliance, a necessary— I don't recall the Duke said a wedding being a marketplace. The words were simple. The effect was brutal. A murmur rose and died, like someone had tried to breathe and been stopped. Marquis Halbrook's mouth tightened. "Your Grace, this is House Halbrook's." The Duke's gaze sharpened slightly. "You have just humiliated a woman in front of the entire court." He tilted his head the smallest fraction. "And you call it internal." Adrian shifted as if he might speak. Lucian didn't even glance at him. The Duke's attention moved to Elara. For the first time since the doors opened, someone looked at her as if she were not a mistake to be corrected, but a person worth addressing. Lucian's voice softened, not in sentiment, but in precision. "You can leave," he said. Elara's throat tightened, unexpected. She didn't want permission to leave. Then he continued, and the room leaned in without meaning to. "Or you can stand," he said, "but not in the place they assign you." A pause deliberate. "Choose. No promise, no explanation, no pleading. Only a line drawn and a choice offered." Elara felt every gaze on her again, but it was different now. The nobility wasn't watching a commoner be erased. They were watching something unstable, power shifting in a direction they couldn't predict. She looked at Adrian. He was still holding Seraphine's arm. His lips parted as if to speak, then closed. His eyes flicked away again. She looked at Seraphine. Seraphine's smile had hardened into something that looked like anger wrapped in lace. She looked at the pews. They were waiting for her to decide whether she was brave or foolish. And then she looked at the Duke. He stood steady, offering nothing but the truth. If she took his hand, there would be consequences. For her, for him, for everyone in the room. Her mind flashed through the last 3 years in a rapid montage. Late nights, ink-stained fingers, silent rooms, whispered credit given to men who hadn't earned it. The way she had swallowed her own name to keep peace. The way she had convinced herself it was temporary. It had never been temporary. They had simply been waiting to replace her. Elara stepped down the last stair. 1 step, 2. Each one felt like walking out of a life she had been trying to earn. She stopped in front of the Duke. Her voice came out calm even though her heart was hammering. "What," she asked, "are you offering me?" The Duke's expression didn't change, but his eyes held something like approval, quiet, exact. A place he said they cannot take. A beat of silence. Elara lifted her hand. The cathedral forgot how to breathe. Her fingers settled into his gloved palm. The contact was firm, real, not romantic, not yet. It felt like a contract signed without ink. The Duke turned still, holding her hand, and faced the altar. "Continue," he said to the officiant. The officiant blinked, stunned. "Your Grace, this I will take responsibility," Lucian said, and the simplicity of it made it unquestionable. Marquess Halbrook's face drained of color. "This is outrageous." Lucian's gaze snapped to him. "No," he said quietly. "What you did is outrageous." Then he looked at Adrian for the first time. Adrian stood rigid, the humiliation twisting on him like a tighter collar. Lucian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You may proceed," he said again. The officiant's hands trembled slightly as he opened his book. Somewhere among the pews, a woman's fan fluttered too fast. Someone whispered, "Is he truly?" and then swallowed the rest. The ceremony became something else. Words that had been meant for one groom and one bride slid inevitably onto new names. Elara stood at the altar with Lucian beside her and felt the world rearrange itself around her body. She had walked into the cathedral believing she would be accepted into a house that didn't want her. She was leaving it as the duchess of a man everyone feared to understand. When the final blessing was spoken and the officiant's voice faltered on the last word, Elara turned her head slightly and met Adrian's eyes at last. He looked wrecked. For a moment she felt the old pain sharp, intimate. Then it receded under something stronger. Clarity. She didn't need to say anything. The story had already changed. What could make a powerful duke claim a bride who had just been cast aside at the altar? Was it a calculated move or a reckless impulse in the heat of the moment? Tell us what you think, and don't forget to subscribe before we step into the most intense part of the story. The court did not know how to contain news like that. By the time Elara stepped into the waiting carriage beside Duke Valancrest, whispers were already spilling out of the cathedral's doors like smoke. Families clustered in groups, their faces carefully composed as they asked questions with their eyes. Footmen ran messages. Ladies murmured behind fans. In the carriage, the air was dim-lined in dark velvet that smelled faintly of cedar and old leather. Elara sat very straight. Her hands were folded in her lap like a posture she had practiced for years. Her bouquet was gone. She realized she hadn't thought to retrieve it. The Duke sat across from her, still composed, his gaze angled toward the window as the carriage began to move. For a few moments, neither spoke. The city slid past stone walls, iron gates, lamps burning in early evening. Elara's mind tried to catch up with her body. A minute ago, I was being erased, she thought. Now, She forced herself to inhale. She was no longer Elara Whitfield, the woman they could dismiss with a word like arrangement. She was Elara Valancrest, and that name she suspected had teeth. The Duke spoke first, as if reading the tension rather than ignoring it. "I did not save you," he said. Elara turned her head. "I didn't ask to be saved." He nodded once. "Good." His voice held no warmth, but it wasn't cruel. It was practical, like a soldier stating the shape of a battlefield. This was not, he continued, a whim. Elara's lips curved faint. That much was obvious. The Duke's eyes flicked to her. "Then you understand what this is. A scandal," she said flatly. "A message," he corrected. "An alignment." Elara watched him for a moment, measuring. "You're saying you chose me to make a point." "I chose you," he said, "because you did not beg." The bluntness startled her more than a compliment would have. "You stood," he continued, "when standing cost you everything. That is rare in that room." Elara's throat tightened. She looked away to the window, watching the city's lights blur. And what she asked softly, "Does that rare quality buy me in your eyes?" The Duke's gaze held steady. A place, a position, resources. That was the answer she expected. It was the answer she could handle. She nodded slowly. "So we speak, plainly." "We do," he said. Elara's eyes returned to him. "Then I will speak plainly, too. I do not want your pity. I do not want your charity. I want a chance, a real one." The Duke's expression didn't shift, but something in his gaze sharpened, as if he respected the clarity. "You will have it," he said, "if you are what I believe you are." "And what do you believe I am?" she asked. His voice lowered a fraction. "Useful." Elara smiled, and there was no humor in it. "Then we will do well together." The Duke studied her for a moment, then said, almost thoughtfully, "I do not like weak people." Elara held his gaze. "Neither do I." The silence that followed felt different. Less like distance, more like an agreement. Valancrest House was not a palace. It rose from the countryside like a fortress that had learned to wear manners. Stone dark and clean. Lanes sharp, no unnecessary ornament. Ironwork precise. Windows tall and uninviting. It looked less like a place for parties and more like a place where decisions happened. As the carriage rolled up the drive, Elara felt her spine tighten again. The door opened before the carriage stopped fully. Not rushed. Timed. A line of servants stood at attention inside the entry hall, their uniforms dark, their posture identical. No smiles, no murmurs. They looked like a household trained to vanish. An older woman stepped forward, gray hair pulled back. Face-strong eyes, sharp, but not unkind. "Your Grace," she said, with a formal bow to the Duke. Then she turned to Elara, and her gaze softened just slightly. "Your Grace." Elara's breath caught at the title. She had imagined hearing it someday, but not like this. "I am Mrs. Thornfield," the woman said. "Head of household." Elara nodded. "Thank you." Mrs. Thornfield gestured toward the interior. "Your chambers are prepared. The staff has been informed. Discretion is expected and will be maintained." The way she said "expected" made it sound like law. Inside the house was quiet in a way that felt engineered. No clutter, no casual conversation. Dark wood polished to a soft shine. Furniture placed with geometric precision. The air smelled faintly of paper and candle wax. Elara's instincts, honed from years of reading rooms, told her this was not a home built for comfort. It was built for control. The Duke led her not to a sitting room, not to a parlor, but to a study. The room had a heavy desk shelves of neatly labeled binders, a map rolled carefully on a side table. No family portraits, no decorative flourishes. Everything had a purpose. He closed the door. Then he spoke without preamble. "This is an alliance," he said, "not a romance." Elara's lips twitched. "I hadn't assumed otherwise." The Duke's gaze held. "Good." He moved around the desk, not sitting yet, as if standing made the truth easier. "You will be Duchess Valancrest," he said. "That name will protect you, but it will also make you visible." Elara lifted her chin. "I'm already visible. People have been staring at me for years." "They stared at you as a curiosity," he said. "Now they will stare as a threat." Elara's heart kicked once hard. He continued, "You will be tested." "I've been tested," she said. The Duke's eyes narrowed slightly. "Not like this." Elara studied him. "Then tell me what you want." His answer was immediate. "I want competence." Elara didn't blink. You'll have it." He paused, then said, as if clarifying something that mattered, "I do not need a wife who smiles at dinners." "I don't smile for free," Elara said. That finally earned the smallest shift in his expression. Not a smile. Something like recognition. "Good," he said again. Then he sat as if the agreement had been sealed. Elara remained standing. "And what do I get besides a title and everyone's hatred?" The Duke's gaze lifted to her. "Power." Elara's voice stayed calm. "Real power." The Duke's mouth tightened. "In this kingdom, power is not in crowns. It is in what people fear being exposed." Elara's skin prickled. She remembered the way the nobility had fallen silent when he stood. Not because he was rich, not because he was handsome, because he held something they didn't want to understand. She asked softly, "What are you?" The Duke's eyes held hers for a beat too long. Then he said, "A man who dislikes lies." It wasn't an answer, not fully, but it was enough to tell her that the truth was larger than a title. The first days at Valancrest House blurred into a pattern of quiet precision. Breakfast appeared at the same time each morning, not served by bustling staff, but placed with clean efficiency as if the house itself did not like noise. Meals were simple and well-made. No theatrical courses, no need to impress anyone. The Duke vanished into his work. Elara left with her new wing, and the immense silent library did what she had always done when placed in unknown territory. She observed. Letters arrived constantly. Some carried the seals of noble houses she recognized immediately. Others bore marks that weren't official, pressed into wax in ways that looked coded. Several did not go through the standard receiving process. A footman would appear, deliver them directly to the Duke's study, and vanish without comment. One morning, unable to ignore it, Elara asked the Duke as he folded a letter with practiced precision. "These aren't diplomatic correspondences," she said. The Duke did not look up. "Not everything is written to be read publicly." Elara's gaze sharpened. "So you're receiving information." He paused. "Just a fraction," then continued folding. "Yes. And your schedule," she added, watching him, "doesn't follow court expectations." "It doesn't," he agreed. Elara waited for more. He offered none. She made a decision in that moment not to push yet. Pushing too early would make her look like a frightened girl trying to understand a man's mysteries. She refused to be that. Instead, she stored every detail like a ledger. The Duke wasn't simply a noble who avoided parties. He was a system. And systems had purposes. The first salon invitation arrived on a cream card edged in gold. Elara read it twice, then looked up at the Duke across the breakfast table. "They want to see me," she said. The Duke sipped his coffee. "They want to measure you." Elara's mouth curved. "Let them." His gaze lingered on her for a beat. "They will not be kind." Elara set the invitation down. Kindness has never been their currency. The salon was held at a townhouse belonging to a minor noble family that wanted very badly to be considered important. Everything about it tried too hard, too many candles, too much perfume, too much laughter that started a fraction late. It was not the highest court, but it was close enough to be dangerous. The kind of room where reputations began to rot quietly. When Elara entered beside Duke Valancrest, the conversation did not stop. It froze mid-sentence as if the air had been cut. Eyes landed on her, stayed there. Someone whispered, "It's her." Another voice answered, "The one from the altar." No, Elara thought, keeping her posture steady. Duchess Valancrest. A woman approached first, tall, elegant, dressed in pale blue silk that signaled old money. Her smile was polite and sharp enough to draw blood. "Your Grace," she said, dipping her head slightly toward the Duke. Then she turned to Elara. "Duchess Valancrest. How unexpected." Elara recognized her from court rumors and the subtle terror in certain letters. "Lady Vivienne Artois." Vivienne's gaze swept Elara with measured interest. "I confess," she continued lightly, "I didn't know His Grace had such progressive taste." The insult was wrapped in silk. Elara met her eyes. "And I confess," she replied, "I didn't know your definition of taste was so narrow." Vivienne's smile tightened. "You must forgive me. We are creatures of tradition." Elara's voice stayed calm. "Tradition is often just habit that no longer serves anyone." Vivienne let out a small, delicate laugh. "How charming." The Duke said nothing. He watched expression unreadable, as if evaluating how Elara handled the first blade. The salon shifted around them. People edged closer, pretending to drift casually, hungry for a scene. A man with a round face and ambitious eyes stepped forward. "Duchess," he said brightly, "I hear there's a new tax policy under discussion. Surely you have thoughts." Vivienne's fan fluttered, and her gaze gleamed. "A trap." Elara smiled faintly. "Of course," she said. "Tax policy always affects those who pretend it doesn't." A few people chuckled nervously. The man blinked. "Well, yes," but Elara continued smoothly. "The proposed policy assumes domestic production can meet demand within the quarter." "It can't." Vivienne tilted her head. "That sounds rather theoretical." Elara turned slightly toward Vivienne, voice still soft. "Reality is always simple. People prefer it complicated because complexity hides errors." The room went quiet in the way it did when someone spoke a truth too clean to ignore. Elara didn't rush. She didn't flood them with information. She offered it like a blade, slow and precise. "If you restrict imports too quickly," she said, "you will create shortages. Shortages create panic. Panic creates price spikes. And price spikes create unrest." A man near the fireplace frowned. "That's a rather dire assumption." Elara looked at him. "It's not an assumption. It's what happened in the eastern provinces 8 years ago when the tariffs were rushed, and half your estates pretended they didn't notice until riots threatened their gates." Silence tightened. Someone cleared their throat. The ambitious man asked weakly, "Then, what would you suggest?" Elara's gaze moved calmly through the group. "Adjust supply before you tighten restrictions. Create a staged timeline. You're trying to look strong quickly, but strength isn't speed. It's control." Vivienne's fan snapped shut. For the first time, her smile faltered. The room did not know what to do with a woman who spoke like a strategist and did not apologize for it. Then, like a storm arriving late, Adrian Hallbrook appeared. He walked in with the posture of a man who needed to be seen. His suit was immaculate, his expression tight. He was accompanied by Seraphine, radiant and cold, her jewels catching candlelight like sharpened glass. The air changed. Whispers sprang up again, new ones, sharper ones. Adrian's gaze found Elara immediately. His face tightened, and for a moment she saw something like panic beneath his practiced composure. He approached, forcing a smile that didn't fit his mouth. "Elara," he said, and the familiarity sounded wrong now, like a hand reaching for something it no longer owned. Elara did not move toward him. She did not offer her hand. She said, "Lord Hallbrook." Adrian flinched at the title. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. Then she smiled sweetly. "Duchess," she purred. "You look, well." Elara's gaze flicked to her for one calm beat. "I look accurate," she replied. Seraphine's smile froze. Adrian turned back to the group too loud. "I couldn't help overhearing your analysis." Elara's pulse stayed steady. "Then you're welcome." He forced a laugh, and it sounded like a cough. "It's oversimplified." A hush fell. People leaned in. This was what they wanted. The old bride, the new heiress, the public test. Elara tilted her head. "Is it?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "Policy isn't that simple," Elara asked very gently. "Have you read last quarter's manufacturing report?" The question was small. The effect was immediate. Adrian's eyes flicked just once towards Seraphine, then back. He hadn't read it. Everyone in the room knew it. Elara didn't press. She didn't need to. She continued with calm precision. "If you had read it," she said, "you'd know the output projections fall short by 17%. That means shortages. That means price spikes. That means unrest." Adrian's face reddened. "You're guessing." Elara's voice stayed even. "I'm using data." A couple of men near the window coughed to hide smiles. A woman's fan fluttered fast. Adrian's pride flared. "You act as if you're the only one capable of understanding policy." Elara looked directly at him. "No, I act as if you've been pretending you understand it." That landed like a slap. Seraphine stepped forward, voice sweet. How ungracious. Elara's gaze shifted to her, calm as water. Ungraceful is replacing someone at the altar and then being offended when she learns how to speak without asking permission. The room went dead silent. Vivian's eyes gleamed with reluctant admiration and irritation. The ambitious man looked dizzy with excitement. Someone had finally said it. Adrian's mouth opened, then shut. He couldn't fight her on words, not here, not now. He had never been the one doing the thinking. Elara watched the realization hit him like a slow collapse. "You never saw me," she thought. "And now you can't unsee me." Adrian turned sharply, pulling Seraphine with him toward another cluster of nobles. Seraphine's smile remained fixed, but her fingers dug into Adrian's arm. Elara exhaled once softly and let the room breathe again. Conversation restarted, but it was different. People asked her questions with less mockery and more caution. They listened. They nodded. Some even looked unsettled, as if realizing the world might be less stable than they'd assumed. And through it all, Duke Valancrest remained at her side, not shielding her, not rescuing her, simply existing with the quiet authority of someone who did not need to prove anything. Later, when the salon finally loosened and Elara slipped out onto a small balcony for air, the night was cool and sharp. The city lights glittered below. Her hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the aftershock of control. She heard footsteps behind her and didn't turn immediately. "You didn't need me," the Duke said. Elara looked back at him. "I never did." His gaze held hers, and in it she saw something subtle, a shift. Respect, yes, but also confirmation. As if he had brought her into that room to test whether his instinct at the altar had been correct. And she asked quietly. He didn't smile, but his voice softened a fraction. "They will remember tonight." Elara faced the city again. They should. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable this time. There was space in it, room for thought. After a moment, the Duke said, "I don't like protecting weak people." Elara's mouth curved. "Then we're fortunate I'm not weak." A pause, then almost imperceptibly, the Duke's expression shifted. Not warmth, not yet, but the beginning of something closer to ease. "Fortunate," he agreed. Elara looked back at the salon through the glass doors. Inside, nobles moved like polished insects, calculating, whispering, adjusting to the new shape of power in the room. For the first time in years, Elara didn't feel like she was watching them from behind someone else's shoulder. She felt like she could change the room simply by standing in it. And beside her, Duke Valancrest stood like a shadow that belonged to the crown, silent, controlled, and far more dangerous than the court wanted to admit. Elara didn't know yet what he was hiding, but she knew this much. The altar had not broken her. It had introduced her, and the court had just begun to understand what kind of woman they had tried to erase. Elara did not sleep that night. Valancrest house had a way of swallowing sound. Even the wind outside seemed to move more quietly along the stone. The servants had extinguished lamps with such efficiency that the corridors were left in a dignified half-darkness, the kind that made a home feel less like a place for living and more like a place for waiting. She lay in the bed that had been prepared for her, linen crisp mattress, firm curtains heavy, and stared at the ceiling until her eyes burned. It wasn't fear that kept her awake. Not exactly. It was the sense of an unfinished equation. At the salon, she had watched the room shift around her, watched people who had arrived ready to cut her down decide instead to listen. She had watched Adrian Halbrook walk away without the words to fight her. She had stood on that balcony afterward and felt Duke Lucian Valancrest beside her like a silent guarantee. And still, there was something she could not name in the way his household moved, in the letters that arrived, in the pauses he allowed himself when she asked the wrong question, in the look the nobility had worn the moment his name was whispered. Lucien was not merely powerful, he was precise, and precision always came from a purpose. Eventually, Elara rose. She put on a robe and tied it tightly, not because she was cold, but because she needed something that reminded her she could still control at least one thing. The hallway outside her chamber was empty. The floorboards did not creak. The lamps along the wall burned low, their flames steady as if the air itself had been trained. Elara walked slowly, letting her steps fall into the rhythm of the house. She passed the familiar corridor that led to the library. Then she continued. The West Wing had been subtly closed off since her arrival, not with a locked door or a spoken warning, with expectation. The servants never walked that direction when she was present. Mrs. Thornfield never mentioned it. And Lucian, when he left her at breakfast, always went that way without explanation. Tonight, the West Wing corridor was darker than the others. And tonight, one door that was always fully shut stood slightly ajar. Elara stopped. Her heart did not race. Her palms did not sweat. She simply felt that quiet, hard click inside her, the same click she had felt at the altar when she realized Halbrook House would never recognize her value. The same click that had made her step into Lucian's hand. If I have entered this world, she thought, I cannot remain blind in it. She pushed the door open. The room beyond stole the air from her lungs. It was not a bedroom. It was not a private study. It was a map of the kingdom. 3 walls were covered from floor to ceiling with charts and parchment. Pins marked locations. Colored threads ran like veins between noble houses. Symbols were written in sharp, controlled handwriting. Some marks were clean and official. Others were codes, simple shapes, small strokes meaningful only to someone who knew the system. A central table sat beneath a hanging lamp. It was covered in files, ledgers, and sealed letters. Each pile was labeled. Each corner of the table had been organized as if chaos had been carefully forced into obedience. Elara stepped inside, and the smell hit her paper ink wax, and something else, old smoke-faint metal, the scent of a life spent too long in late-night work. She moved to the nearest wall and scanned it. House, Artois. House, Mornay. House, Halbrook. She saw the names like familiar faces. Then her gaze fell to a file pinned near the center. Halbrook Financial, Political, Marriage Alliance, and beneath it, written in clean, disciplined lines, were bullet points, shifts in trade policy, key negotiators, known weaknesses, emotional leverage. Elara leaned closer. She recognized the phrasing, not the handwriting. She couldn't see enough to be certain, but the structure, the logic, the way the thought moved from point to point. It was her thought. She pulled the file free and opened it. Inside were copies of letters she had drafted, agreements she had revised, negotiations she had guided. Some pages even held notes in margins, highlighting decisions, pointing out why a certain line would pressure a rival house without provoking war. Her mouth went dry. She flipped through faster now, heart pounding, not with fear but with recognition. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't rumor. This was surveillance. Elara whispered the truth to herself, as if speaking it softly might make it less real. "This isn't record-keeping," she said, into the empty room. "This is watching." A voice behind her answered, calm as the house itself. "You shouldn't have seen that it said, at least not yet." Elara turned. Duke Lucian Valancrest stood in the doorway, fully dressed despite the hour. No robe, no loosened collar. He looked as he always did, controlled, steady, as if sleep were an indulgence he never allowed himself. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man assessing a consequence he had delayed for too long. Elara held the file in her hands like evidence. "What is this?" she asked. Lucien stepped into the room and closed the door behind him with a soft click. The sound felt final. "The truth," he said. Elara's gaze sharpened. "You're tracking the entire nobility." Lucian's eyes flicked to the wall of maps. "No." Elara waited. "I control information about them," he corrected. The distinction chilled her because it implied intention. Elara's fingers tightened around the file, while Lucian walked to the central table, set down a sealed letter, and finally met her eyes directly. "Because knowledge is the only real power in this kingdom," he said, voice low. "Titles are theater. Money can be stolen. Armies can be defeated. But secrets properly handled can reshape a nation." Elara felt her throat constrict. "You collect secrets," she said slowly. Lucien didn't deny it. "I collect proof." Elara took one step closer. For whom Lucian's gaze didn't flinch. "For the crown." She stared. "You work for the king." Lucian's mouth tightened, as if the words were both true and insufficient. "I work with him," he said carefully. "There's a difference." Elara's mind raced. Every rumor she had heard, every whisper about Valancrest House being strange, every way the nobility had gone silent when his name was spoken, pieces slid into place with brutal speed. "You're a spy," she said. Lucian's expression remained composed, but his eyes darkened slightly, not with offense, but with the weight of the label. "If you need a simple word," he said, "yes." The air changed. Elara realized she had been holding her breath. She forced herself to inhale slow and controlled, as if breathing could keep her from losing balance. "You married me," she said, voice steady but sharpened by new understanding. "And you didn't think I deserved to know this." Lucien's eyes did not leave hers. I didn't know what you would do with it, he said. Elara laughed once sharp and humorless. And now you do. Lucian's gaze drifted to the file in her hands, her work laid bare in his system. I know you're not a fool, he said. I know you don't panic for entertainment. And I know you didn't come here to be part of a scandal. Elara stepped closer to the map wall and pointed at the Halbrook section. You have a file on them, she said. That I understand. But why is my writing in it? Lucian's face didn't change. Elara turned, meeting his eyes again. You have a file on me. He didn't pretend otherwise. Yes. The admission landed like a weight on her chest. How long, she asked. Lucian's answer came without hesitation, which made it worse. Before you stepped into that cathedral, Elara went still. I've been watching you for 3 years, Lucian said. Elara's fingers tightened. Watching. Lucian corrected again, as if accuracy mattered more than comfort. Observing. Tracking the work you did for House Halbrook, the agreements you salvaged, the negotiations you guided, the correspondence you corrected. Elara's voice dropped. And you said nothing. Lucian's gaze remained steady. I observed. Elara's eyes narrowed. Why Lucian walked to the table and opened a drawer. Inside was another folder, thicker than the Halbrook file. He placed it on the table and slid it toward her. Elara didn't touch it yet. Lucian spoke in a voice that held no apology, only truth, because the court is full of people who pretend, he said. People who borrow intelligence, borrow bravery, borrow morality, then wear it like jewelry. I needed to know whether you were real. Elara's stomach tightened. So you tested me. Lucian's eyes sharpened slightly. I confirmed you. Elara stared at him for a long moment, then finally opened the folder. Inside were pages that made her breath catch. Not just her work, her absence. Notes predicting what would happen to Halbrook House without her. Trade agreements vulnerable, diplomacy unstable, reputation inflated beyond capability, marriage alliance used as cover for financial maneuvering. And in one corner, written in stark clarity, primary strategist Elara Whitfield, without her decline within 18 months. Elara's mouth went dry. You knew, she whispered. You knew they would replace me. Lucien did not pretend otherwise. Men like Adrian Halbrook replace what threatens their pride. He benefited from your brilliance and hated you for it. Elara looked up, anger burning clean now. So you waited. I prepared, Lucian corrected. The word was colder than waited. It meant intention, planning. Elara stood very still, then the altar. Lucian's gaze didn't shift. I was there. Elara's pulse hammered. Not by chance. Lucian's voice remained calm. No. For a moment, Elara felt the edge of betrayal because being chosen had felt like a miracle. And miracles are easier to stomach than strategies. Then she forced herself to steady. Why, she asked carefully, did you choose me? Lucian's eyes held hers. Because you didn't beg, he said again, quieter this time. Because you stood when the room wanted you to break. And because you were already part of this world's machinery, whether you wanted it or not. Elara's voice sharpened. So I was useful. Lucian didn't deny the word. He didn't soften it. Yes, he said. You were. You are. Elara felt her jaw tighten. A tool. Lucien shook his head one slow. No, he said. A choice. The distinction struck harder than any apology would have. Lucian stepped closer to the table and opened another file. He let her see the first page. It was a list. Corruption in customs, bribes along the river routes, noble debts hidden behind charities, titles bought with manufactured scandals. a web of manipulation that reached everywhere. "This is what I'm doing," Lucian said quietly. Elara scanned the page, her mind moving fast. "This is enormous," she said. Lucian's voice remained flat. "It's the kingdom." Elara looked at him. "And the king knows." Lucian hesitated just a fraction, enough for Elara to notice. "The king knows I gather information," he said carefully. "He doesn't know the full extent." Elara's gaze sharpened. "Why not?" Lucian's mouth tightened. "Because he is young," he said. "Because he is idealistic. Because if I placed every scandal and every crime in front of him at once, he would try to burn the court down in a single night." Elara understood immediately. A king with good intentions could be more dangerous than a king with bad ones. "You're protecting him," she said. "I'm protecting the kingdom from sudden justice," Lucian replied. "Justice done poorly creates war." Elara stared at the wall of maps again, suddenly seeing it differently. Not as a monster's den, as an armor ugly, necessary. "And what do you want from me?" she asked, voice steady. Lucian's gaze moved over her face like he was reading the answer already. "You can be only my wife," he said. "Live safely behind my name. Attend dinners. Smile when required. Let me handle the rest." Elara said nothing. Lucian continued. Or he paused, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something close to vulnerability flicker in his eyes. Not emotional, but honest. "Or you can be my partner," he said. Elara's breath caught unexpected. "Partner," she repeated. Lucian nodded once. "You understand this world. You understand leverage and language and consequence. You don't collapse under humiliation. You don't crave applause. And you don't pretend you're kind when you're not." Elara's lips pressed together. "That sounds like an insult." Lucian's gaze held hers. "It's respect." Elara looked at the maps again. She could leave. She could keep the title, enjoy the protection, and never touch the shadow work behind it. She could take her revenge by simply existing as Duchess Valancrest and watching Holbrook House rot. It would be enough for most people. But Elara had never been most people. She thought of the letters she had written for Holbrook House, carefully phrased to preserve peace. She thought of the people outside the cathedral, shopkeepers, teachers, clerks, who would never have the luxury of a noble's mistake, who would pay for it. Always. "What happens?" she asked, voice quiet. "If I refused?" Lucian's answer was immediate, honest. "You keep your name," he said. "You keep the protection, and you walk away from this room forever." Elara nodded slowly. Then she looked back down at the file in her hands. Proof that her intelligence had been used, erased, exploited, and something in her chest hardened into clarity. "If I join you," she said, "I'm not standing behind you." Lucian's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he had expected the condition. "No," he said, "you won't." Elara held his gaze. "I decide with you." Lucien didn't blink. "Agreed." "And you don't hide things from me," Elara added. "Not the parts that matter." Lucian's mouth tightened, then relaxed. "Agreed," he said again. Elara exhaled slowly, as if signing something inside herself. "Then I stay," she said, "and I work." Lucian's shoulders eased a fraction, as if a weight he had carried alone shifted slightly. He extended his hand, not as a romantic gesture, but as a pact. Elara took it. His grip was firm, calloused, steady. "Then we begin," Lucian said. They began the next morning, not with grand speeches or vows. With paper, Lucian brought her into the system, how the files were categorized, how each noble house was tracked, what colors meant what. He spoke in short sentences and expected her to keep up. Elara did. She read quickly. She understood patterns. And more importantly, she understood people. The first case they tackled together was not a dramatic one. It was a minor Lord Fenwick skimming funds from the royal treasury through a construction project that never finished. The file was thick with numbers. The evidence was clean. Elara scanned the pages, then looked up. "Expose him," she said, at first instinctive. "Make an example." Lucian's expression didn't change. "If we expose him, his household collapses. His staff loses work. His tenants lose protection. His wife and children are ruined." Elara's jaw tightened. "So we let him keep stealing." Lucian's gaze held hers. "We stop him." Elara leaned back slightly, understanding. Quietly. Lucian nodded once. Elara's mind moved fast. "We give him a choice," she said. "Return what he took. Step away from the contracts. Resign from the committee." Lucian watched her. "And if he refuses," Elara's voice stayed calm, "then we expose him." Lucian's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're willing to use fear." Elara met his gaze without flinching. "Fear is already being used. By them. I'm just changing who holds it." Lucienne studied her for a long moment, then said softly, "Your thinking is different." Elara's mouth curved faint. "Your thinking holds balance. Mine changes direction." Lucian's eyes held hers, and for the first time, Elara felt something shift in the space between them. Not warmth, but alignment. Like two blades set side by side. They sent the letter that night. It was brief. Clean. It left no room to misunderstand. Lord Fenwick returned the money within 3 days. No one outside his household ever knew why. The second case was uglier. A noble woman, Lady Marrow, had been running illegal gambling rooms under the cover of charity events. Families had lost everything. Marriages had collapsed. Suicides had been hidden behind polite language. Elara read the file and felt her stomach tighten. "This is vile," she said quietly. Lucian's voice remained flat. "It is common." Elara closed the folder. "Then we shut it down." Lucian looked at her. How Elara's answer was immediate. "We go after her reputation," she said. "Not with rumor, with proof." Lucian watched her, then said almost approvingly, "Good." They worked late into the night, laying out a path not to destroy the entire house, not to scatter innocent servants onto the streets, but to force Lady Marrow to close the rooms, repay what she could, and remove herself from influence. It was messy. It was morally gray. It required leverage and threats and calculated mercy. And Elara found to her surprise that she could stomach it, not because she enjoyed the power, because she had spent too long watching people like Lady Marrow hurt others without consequence. Now consequence had a name: Valancrest, and increasingly Elara. Their partnership built itself in small moments. Lucian trusted her with a file he would have kept to himself a week earlier. Elara corrected a strategy that would have caused unnecessary public harm. Lucian adjusted without pride. They moved around each other in the study like soldiers on the same field. Different strengths, one goal. Elara began to notice details she had missed before. Lucian didn't eat properly when he worked. He drank coffee, like a habit, not a pleasure. He moved with the same controlled rhythm at midnight as he did at noon. One evening, after hours of work, Elara finally pushed back from the table and rubbed her eyes. "You're going to burn yourself out," she said. Lucian didn't look up. "I don't burn." Elara's mouth twitched. "Everyone burns." Lucian's pen paused just slightly. "I've been doing this long enough to know my limits." Elara studied him. "How long?" Lucian's gaze remained on the page. "Long enough," he said, It was not an answer, but Elara heard the shape of a loneliness in it. Later that night, she was still in the study when the door opened and Lucian entered carrying a tray. She looked up, surprised. He set the tray down without comment. Bread cheese soup, simple food that smelled warm and real. Elara blinked. "You didn't have to do that." Lucian's voice was dry. "You forget to eat when you're focused." Elara stared at him. "You noticed?" Lucian's gaze flicked to her. "I notice everything." The words should have felt threatening. Instead, they felt like care translated through a man who didn't speak the language easily. Elara picked up the spoon. "Thank you." Lucian didn't respond with warmth. He sat across from her and ate in silence. And for the first time since the altar, Elara felt something close to peace settle in her chest. Not because she was safe, because she wasn't alone in the work anymore. One night, when they were deep into a strategy, and Elara adjusted a line of attack that would have pushed a noble house into collapse, Lucian leaned back and stared at the new plan. "This," he said slowly, "is better." Elara didn't allow herself to smile too brightly. "Then we do it." Lucian's gaze lifted to her. "You made it better." Elara corrected gently because the correction mattered. "We made it better." Something shifted in Lucien's expression, then almost imperceptible. The hard edge of solitude softening under the weight of shared effort. Weeks passed like that. The court began to whisper about the Duchess Valancrest, with a different tone. Not mockery, not curiosity, caution. And in the shadows of those whispers, invitations arrived. The largest of them arrived on thick paper sealed with royal wax. Elara held it in her hands and felt the weight before she even opened it. Lucian watched from across the table, expression unreadable. Elara broke the seal and read aloud. "His Majesty requests the presence of Duke Lucian Valancrest and Duchess Elara Valancrest at the Grand Royal Ball." She looked up. "They're bringing us into the light." Lucian's gaze held steady. "Yes." Elara's pulse quickened. "Will Halbrook House be there?" Lucian's voice was flat. "Of course." Elara folded the invitation carefully. "Then it's time." Lucian didn't smile, but something in his eyes darkened with intention. "It is." The night of the Grand Royal Ball arrived wrapped in gold and sound. The palace blazed with light from every window. Music poured out over the stone steps like water. Carriages lined the drive in a glittering line of privilege. Guards in ceremonial uniforms stood in perfect formation, faces expressionless beneath polished helmets. Elara stepped down from the Valancrest carriage and felt the air shift around her. She wore a gown of deep dark fabric, midnight, almost black cut, with precision rather than softness. It didn't beg to be admired. It demanded to be acknowledged. Her hair was pinned up, exposing her neck. On her hand, a ring with the Valancrest crest caught the light like a quiet warning. She looked nothing like the woman in ivory who had stood at the altar. And she felt different, too. Lucian stepped beside her, not leading, not guiding, walking with her, as an equal. As they approached the palace entrance, whispers rose immediately. "That's her, the one replaced at the altar." "No, someone else," corrected voice tight. "That is Duchess Valancrest." Elara's fingers curled slightly against the fabric of her skirt. She kept her gaze forward. "They're still looking at me like I'm a story," she murmured. Lucian's voice was low beside her. "Tonight, you become the standard." Inside the ballroom was enormous. A ceiling painted with mythic scenes arched above a sea of chandeliers. The floor gleamed with polished stone. Nobles drifted in clusters like birds of prey disguised as art. The announcement cut through the music. His Grace Duke, Lucian Valancrest. Her Grace Duchess, Elara Valancrest. The room fell into a silence so complete it felt like breath being held. Lucian and Elara entered. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. Fans froze mid-flutter. Elara felt eyes on her from every angle, but she didn't shrink. She had walked into worse rooms. She had survived worse humiliations, and she was not alone. They descended the steps. Halfway down, Elara saw them. Adrian Halbrook stood with his family near the center of the room. His posture was rigid, his face too controlled. Seraphine stood beside him, brilliant in gold jeweled like a prize. Her smile stretched too tightly across her mouth. Marquess Halbrook's gaze met Elara's for a brief moment, and something flickered there. Calculation, anger, fear. Elara held his gaze and did not look away. Then the crowd shifted and the king approached. King Alistair moved without entourage, as if he liked stepping into rooms alone just to watch people panic. He was younger than most, expected his face open enough to invite underestimation, but his eyes were sharp, too sharp to be naive. He stopped in front of Lucian, then looked to Elara. "I have heard much about you," he said to her, voice warm but precise. Elara dipped her head not too deep, not submissive, just correct. "I hope it was true," she replied. The king's mouth curved slightly. "I prefer people who don't pretend." Elara's eyes met his. "Then you'll be disappointed less often." A soft ripple of nervous laughter moved through the nearest nobles. The king seemed amused. Then he turned slightly toward the room, raising his voice just enough to carry. "There is something I wish to clarify tonight," he said. The ballroom quieted further, as if the chandeliers themselves leaned closer. "A number of accomplishments within this court," the king continued, "have been credited incorrectly." Elara felt the room's attention snap like a whip. The king's gaze moved over the nobles, lingering briefly on House Halbrook. "Treaties," he said, "trade agreements, negotiations, hailed as triumphs of certain houses." He paused. "In truth," he said, "they were the work of someone else." The silence became unbearable. The king turned his eyes to Elara. "Duchess, Elara Valancrest," he said clearly. "Step forward." Elara's pulse hammered once hard. She stepped forward anyway. The king's voice remained calm. "Is it true," he asked, "that you authored the draft that secured the Eastern Provinces' cooperation during the tariff dispute?" A murmur rippled. People recognized the deal. They recognized the prestige attached to it. Elara's mind moved fast. She could refuse. She could protect old houses. She could soften the truth to avoid war. But she remembered the altar, the way they had erased her without hesitation. She met the king's gaze. "Yes," she said, "it is true." A sharp intake of breath moved through the crowd. The king's smile turned slightly colder. "I thought so," he said. "I have seen the original drafts." Head snapped toward Adrian Halbrook. His face flushed beneath his mask. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. The king continued, voice smooth as velvet over steel. "Lord Halbrook," he called. Adrian stepped forward, forced like a man being pulled by a hook. "Yes, your majesty," Adrian said. Voice strained. "You must be grateful," the king said pleasantly, "to have had such an advisor." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Of course." The king's gaze sharpened. "Then why," he asked softly, "did you treat her as disposable?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Adrian opened his mouth. No answer came. The king let the silence do the work. Then he turned back to Lucian, and the room tensed again. Valancrest, the king, said, voice clear, you have served this kingdom in shadow long enough. Lucian did not react. He simply inclined his head slightly, acknowledging without submission. The king stepped up onto the dais, and the staff struck the floor to demand full silence. My lords and ladies, the king announced, this kingdom cannot be sustained by borrowed reputations and purchased honor. It cannot be ruled by men who inherit power and women who earn it being ignored. Elara felt the crowd shift, fear, anger, curiosity. The king continued, there are corruption and manipulations within our noble houses that can no longer be tolerated. A hush. Nobles glanced at each other, calculating who might be exposed. To ensure stability, the king said, I am granting Duke Lucian Valancrest authority over noble affairs. A wave of shock moved through the room. Some nobles paled, some stiffened, none dared speak. The king's voice carried over them all. He will investigate, he said, and he will intervene. Lucian remained still, as if he had expected this moment and accepted its weight long ago. The king turned his gaze to Elara, and a woman like you, he said, cannot remain behind him. Elara's breath caught. You will stand, the king said with equal authority. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Elara felt the weight of that sentence in her bones. Equal authority meant enemies. It meant danger. It meant her name could no longer be erased. Lucian's voice came low beside her, just for her. Do you refuse? He asked quietly. Elara looked at him, not at his title, not at the fear he inspired, at the man who had offered her a choice at the altar, and then later offered her another choice in a room full of secrets. She held his gaze and spoke clearly. No, she said, I do not refuse. The king nodded once satisfied, and a chain bearing the royal seal was brought forward. It was placed around Lucian's neck. Then another identical in weight was placed around Elara's. Gold felt cold against skin. Power always did. The king raised his voice again. Duke Valancrest and Duchess Valancrest speak with my authority in noble matters, he declared. Those who defy them defy the crown. The applause that followed was immediate, thunderous, too loud, too fast. Elara heard the truth beneath it. Some applauded because they believed. Others because they feared being seen not applauding. Then the king lifted a hand again, and the applause died as quickly as it had begun. There is one more matter, he said. The air tightened. The king gestured, and guards moved into the crowd. They walked with purpose, stopping before House Halbrook. Marquis Roland Halbrook took a stiff step forward, face rigid. Your Majesty, the king's voice cut through him. Justice, a hush fell. A folder was handed to Lucien. Lucian opened it with the same calm he used when reading a letter. His voice when he spoke was not cruel. It was simply final. House Halbrook, he said, is charged with manipulating a marriage ceremony for financial advantage. Whispers exploded quietly. Lucian continued. They are charged with the systematic appropriation of labor and intellect for public gain. They are charged with transactions concealed through alliances. Marquis Halbrook's face drained. This is an insult. Lucian's gaze lifted cold. No, he said softly. This is a record. Adrian stepped forward, voice tense. I don't understand. Elara looked at him, and her voice cut clean through the moment. You understand, she said. You just chose not to face it. Adrian's face twisted, shock and guilt flickering. Elara, please do not. Elara said calm but deadly, use my name as if it still belongs to you. Seraphine's smile cracked. This is absurd. Lucian's gaze shifted to her, and the room chilled. No, he said quietly. This is overdue. The king spoke again, voice even. The punishment for these crimes, he said, could be exile. A murmur rose. Marquis Holbrook swallowed. Your Majesty. The king raised a hand. However, he continued, Duke Valancrest has proposed a different sentence. Lucien read from the file. House Holbrook will lose its committee privileges, Lucien said. Its finances will be placed under royal oversight. It will repay all gains made through fraudulent negotiation and misattribution. Adrian's face went white. Lucien added, and Lord Adrian Holbrook will perform public service under Crown supervision for 5 years. The room trembled under the words. Adrian's voice broke. Your Majesty. The king's eyes did not soften. Now he said, there was one final instruction. The king's voice lowered slightly as if the quiet made it worse. Apologize, he said. Adrian turned to Elara. His eyes were wet now, desperation breaking through his pride. I'm sorry, he whispered. Elara, Elara watched him with a calm that surprised even her. Sorry for what she asked softly. Adrian swallowed, speechless. Elara's voice remained gentle, which made it sharper. Sorry because you understand what you did, she said. Or sorry because you lost the right to keep doing it? Adrian's mouth opened. No answer came. His apology collapsed under its own emptiness. Seraphine stood rigid, jaw clenched, as if she could hold humiliation away by refusing to blink. Marquis Holbrook's hands trembled slightly. The king nodded once satisfied enough. Let it be known, he said to the court, that this is the last night in which theft is rewarded because it is wrapped in silk. Silence followed. Then again applause, louder, more frantic, as if nobles could clap their way out of guilt. Later, as the ball resumed in fragments, music restarting conversations, attempting to pretend nothing had shifted. Elara found herself on the dais, standing beside Lucien, with the gold chain cold against her throat. Below, nobles moved differently now. They did not look at her with curiosity. They looked with calculation, and calculation was a kind of respect. One by one, people approached, not with grand speeches, with small bows, with careful words. Your Grace, a man murmured, eyes lowered. Duchess, another said, voice tight. Elara did not order them to bow. She did not demand anything. She simply stood, and they bowed anyway. It started with one, then another, then a wave that spread quietly like a rule being written without ink. Elara watched the effect with something like disbelief. At the altar, she had been asked to step aside as if she were nothing. Now, without a single command, the room was adjusting itself around her. A noblewoman dipped her head and said, Duchess Valancrest. Elara met her eyes. Lady. The noblewoman's gaze flicked downward again, involuntary. Elara realized the truth in a single clean thought. They are not bowing because they like me. They are bowing because they finally see what I am. And she was not ashamed of it. When the last official announcements had ended and the ballroom began to thin, Elara slipped away onto a side balcony for air. The night was colder here, the sky clear above the palace spires. The city lights glittered far below like a distant sea. Elara rested her hands on the railing and closed her eyes for a moment. Her mind replayed the altar-white lace humiliation, the taste of betrayal. Then replayed the dais gold chain power, Adrian's face collapsing under consequence. A strange emotion rose in her chest. Not triumph, relief. Because the world had finally acknowledged what she already knew, she was not disposable. Footsteps approached behind her, slow and familiar. Lucien stopped beside her without speaking at first. the silence between them felt different, now not distance but shared weight. Elara didn't turn immediately, so she said, softly, "We're no longer in the shadows." Lucian's voice was low. "No," Elara exhaled. "Do you regret it?" Lucian's gaze moved over the palace grounds, thoughtful. "I regret that it took this long." Elara finally turned to him. "You did this," she said quietly. "You could have stayed hidden. You could have let them keep pretending." Lucian's eyes held hers. "I'm tired of pretending too." Elara's throat tightened unexpectedly. Lucian spoke again, quieter now, as if the next words were more difficult than exposing an entire noble house. "I chose you," he said. Elara's brows lifted slightly. "At the altar." Lucian nodded once. "Yes," Elara's voice stayed calm. "You said you chose me for my mind." Lucian's gaze did not flinch. "I did." Elara waited. Lucian's jaw tightened, as if he were forcing himself to speak something he had never practiced. And he added, "I stayed because of who you are." The words landed gently, like a hand placed carefully. Elara blinked, caught off guard by the honesty more than any romantic gesture. "You don't need to explain," she said, voice quiet. Lucian's eyes remained on her. "I want to." Elara studied him. The man who had looked like a blade in the cathedral aisle now looked in the cold night air like someone learning what it meant to share a burden. "I don't need to prove anything anymore," Elara said softly. "Not to them." Lucien nodded. "I know." A pause. Elara looked out over the city again. "I'm not staying because of the chain," she said. "Or the title." Lucian's voice was barely above a whisper. Then why Elara turned to him, fully letting the truth exist without armor. "Because I choose to," she said. "For myself." Lucian's gaze softened just slightly, like a crack in stone. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Lucian lifted his hand slow, as if asking permission, without words. His fingers brushed her cheek with a gentleness that didn't fit his reputation. Elara's breath caught. "I'm not good at this," Lucian said quietly. "I'm good at systems, at outcomes, at avoiding chaos." Elara's lips curved faintly. "And I'm good at walking into chaos and refusing to kneel." Lucian's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. He kept his hand against her cheek, steady. "I don't know," he said, "when this stopped being a decision and became something else." Elara's eyes held his. "Maybe it became something else the moment you asked me to choose." Lucian's thumb brushed lightly once, almost hesitant. "And what do you choose now?" he asked. Elara's answer was quiet, unwavering. "You," she said. Lucian leaned in. The kiss wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a performance for the court. It was soft, careful, and real, as if both of them were learning a language they had been denied for years. When they pulled back, Elara's forehead rested briefly against his. Below them, the palace continued to glitter, the court continued to whisper, the kingdom continued to spin. But on the balcony, in that brief pocket of cold night and quiet truth, they were simply two people who had been underestimated and had decided together to become impossible to ignore. Elara let her eyes close for a heartbeat. At the altar, she had been replaced like a mistake. Tonight, she had stood above the court as a standard, and beside her, Lucian Valancrest, Duke Spy Shadow of the Crown, stood not as her rescuer, not as her owner, but as her equal. Elara opened her eyes and looked at him with calm certainty. "We'll change it," she said. Lucian's gaze held hers, steady as stone. "We will," he replied. And for the first time since the world had tried to erase her, Elara believed the future wasn't something she had to beg for. It was something she could build. And just like that, the girl they once dismissed became the woman no one could ignore. Thank you for staying with Elara's journey. Your time and support truly mean a lot. If this story moved, you feel free to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories where power, truth, and unexpected love collide. There are many more stories waiting, and I can't wait to share them with you.